Okay, so we are continuing with the perception topic, and we are going to finish it. So I may take less questions, but we will come to slide 80 and finish this chapter today in the next 40 minutes. So how do we detect when infants perceive the sound categories such as phonemes of a language? For example, how do we understand that the infant hears the difference between pat and bat, which sound very similar? Of course, we do habituation studies. It might be assessing it through sucking rate, for example. We habituate the kids to one of the sounds, say pat. And the kid keeps hearing it. The more they suck, the more on the headphones it says pat, pat, pat, pat, pat. And at one point, like all of you guys would, the infant gets bored. They start sucking less. And then, at that point, we introduce bat. So if the infant recognizes that bat is not the same as pat, their sucking rate will also show a difference. They'll increase. If it does, then we know that they understand the difference between, or they hear. When I say understand the difference, I don't mean they understand both words have 3 letters. And no, they hear the difference between pat and bat then. Right. Okay. All right, and so here we go. Perceiving sounds of a different language. Young infants perceive a wide range of sounds, but by 12 months of age, they're better at distinguishing the sounds of their native language. If there are 2, both languages, okay? It doesn't have to be one language. But for example, these are kids who are coming from an English background. The blue ones are making Hindi sound distinctions, and the yellow ones are Salish sound distinctions. And here you have those who are from Salish backgrounds and those from Hindi backgrounds. As you can see, at 11 to 12 months of age, they can differentiate the sounds of their own language, right? These are Hindi and Salish kids. But when you look at the kids whose native language is English, you see between 6 and 8 months, they're not doing pretty bad, especially with Hindi, but it keeps decreasing as they get older. The ability they have to distinguish these sounds that are not in their language but in those other languages starts decreasing. Okay. Here we see that the infants become less sensitive to these sounds. Is it a bad thing? No. It really isn't a bad thing. It's actually a very helpful, efficient thing, because that means that the infant is fine-tuning their ear to those sounds. They're going to be better able to attend to those statistical relationships that we talked about. So while it looks like they're losing an ability, in fact, they're giving up that generous ability of understanding all those sounds or recognizing all those sounds to basically fine-tune and adapt their hearing so that they are going to be able to learn the language. Because learning the language has a lot to do with hearing the sounds, the phonemes of a language too. Okay. Between 7 to 9 months, infants starts parsing words, and we talked about this already, the statistical learning capacity. They detect and remember regularities in speech. And some say, and most agree, that this capacity is innate. And so, in other words, can you think about regularities in Turkish language really quickly? What could be some regularities? Yes. Also, we have the same endings because we conjugate verbs, for example, for all past tense. We could keep hearing the same suffixes over and over again, which should signal the end of a word, right? For example, geliyorum, atıyorum, yapıyorum, kaçıyorum, zıplıyorum, right? All of those seems to have those same endings, and you should understand that when you hear those suffixes back to back, it will signal the end of a verb, for example. At least you'd come to expect that. Is there a role for the environment? Well, yes. Adults use visual, tactile, and auditory stimulus to teach language. What have we learned? So can you imagine a mother who doesn't talk to her infant much because the infant doesn't yet know language? It happens. When do we start reading to infants or children? Huh? How many, what?
Maybe
2 years old.
When they start to respond, maybe. Like when they start to use words, like respond.
I think it's...
Because I feel like the baby would understand because they respond.
Well, how do they respond? Like verbally?
Yeah. Like when they start to say little words, like little words, they can just start to speak.
2 years, 1 year, 1.5 years?
1.5
1.5 to
to
2.
I think it's began with birth,
It should begin with birth, you're saying.
crying, or...
Emre Bey, when should we start reading to the...
I don't know, we started like he was 3 months old.
3-month-old?
I started reading.
Yes. Now, they won't understand the whole book. The books will not be like the books that you read to older children with stories in them. You obviously are not going to read Red Riding Hood to a 6-month-old. Their books are going to be simple. Those books are going to be durable. Some of them they can put in their mouths, for example. Some of them teach how to touch things, right? They're kind of squiggly and soft. So yes, you can start early. And it might not go past just looking at pictures and naming things at first. But the thing that they need most is hearing input, language input. And when you have a book, it basically diversifies your language. So think about it like, I'm sure Emre Bey isn't talking about pandas in his daily life. But if there was a book and there was a panda in it, he's going to talk about that panda, right? It diversifies the language that he's using. And what the baby needs a lot is to hear language and hear a lot of it. And, hear a lot of it, but not through the television, not through the TV. There are studies that have done this. They've looked at children who spend long amounts of time, and when I said children, but I meant infants and babies, in front of TV. For example, mothers put children in high chairs, right? Mama sandalyesi, and put in front of the TV and kind of forget them. And they've done research to show that those kids actually know fewer words for every extra hour per day. Why is it that they know less? Because that's language input too, they're hearing.
Because social interaction.
Yes. And what does then social interaction tell you? It tells you the role of nurture then. Yes? Baunu smiles every time I say nature. I looked at her this time, she's just taking notes. Yes. So it's basically telling you that children are not pre-programmed to learn language such that you were 6. That when they are put in front of a TV for their first language, TV doesn't teach them language when they are 6 months old, 8 months old, 12 months old. Because they need that they need that interaction. They need the eye contact. They need to and from. They need all of this in order to make meaning of these words and to attain them. Yes?
I have 2 questions. The first one is, in the TV shows, they create some characters which faces the kid, like they're turning through the kid's direction and they're making eye contact. Can the kid understand that they are not real?
Yes. Those programs are usually not for infants, but for older preschool children. And you know why those programs start speaking, for example, when, in my generation, when there was Sesame Street, for example, the Sesame Street characters didn't talk to us. But now Dora the Explorer talks to you, right? Stops, asks questions. It's because researchers identified the fact that children don't actually effectively learn language when there isn't this social interaction. They are trying artificially to create the interaction. So Dora actually asks questions, waits for an answer, responds, says, good try, let's do it again. And so all of that is happening because they discovered through research. And do they understand that Dora is not real? A 4-year-old knows that Dora is not real. There's research that shows that 2.5-year-olds, for example, know that if they imagine a cookie, they know they can't eat that cookie. But I know the famous case of Pikachu, no. But again, that was one child among many. It wasn't that all Pokemon watching children all of a sudden jumped from the window, right? And
my other question is, we talk about book reading to the kid, but what about making up some stories in our minds?
So that, I am very, very curious about that. Because what is happening, and this is hold on to it, come back for a senior thesis with this. I am very interested. Because what's happening is, now there are such great books for children, right? I regularly go to the children's book section to see what there is. It doesn't matter if I'm promoting a place, they deserve to be promoted. Arkadaş Kitabevi at Kent Park actually has a great children's section. And it is so refreshing to see so many different genres of books that are made for such young children. I mean, my generation, I'm thinking we are in the same generation with Emre Bey, 3 aşağı 5 yukarı. It was Keloğlan, Nasrettin Hoca, Ayşegül. Cinali, of course Cinali. And we all read with Cinali. And so it was and we loved those books too. I mean, I had the whole full Ayşegül series, full Nasrettin Hoca series. What was the other one that I say? Ayşegül, Keloğlan. I don't remember if Keloğlan had series. But so we had to go into chapter books with fewer pictures and more writing faster when we learned how to read, because there wasn't much available. Now there's so much. But what it is that parents are also thinking that book storytelling is just book reading. For example, we ask mothers who come to the lab to tell a story from a book with pictures but no words. And we also give them a questionnaire. And in the questionnaire, it asks them, do you tell tales to your child? Like, masal anlatır mısınız? With no book. And many parents say no. And one parent actually, while she was filling it out, turned to me and said, who does this in this day and age where there are so many nice books? Now, I'm wondering, this is a question. I'm not interested in who does this, but I'm interested in what happens when you do it. Because books with pictures help the child understand the story because they provide memory support, right? The picture depicts part of the story. What happens if the child has to rely on their verbal memory, working memory, to understand the story, right? More. So are there people who actually tell more stories to their children with no pictures? And if they do that practice, are there benefits to their child through this practice? Is a question I am very curious about. And I don't know the answer. I don't think anybody does. Because we have all started working on books on print, and now we are all working with books on digital media. So what's fashionable right now is basically looking at e-books. Yes. Efendim.
When we read books, the children can imagine what we read them, and then they can improve their ability to understand what they are told, and they can start to imagine. But when we give them books with pictures, I think it's not so different than watching TV, because...
No, it is different. That is quite, yes. Because no picture is dynamic. Pictures can only capture an aspect of a scene. There's research done with this too. There's a lot that is left outside the picture. You can't, for example, show causal relationships very well with pictures, right? Because the actions are on different pages. It doesn't turn fast enough either to make them like a moving picture. So there's a lot to be inferred with books with pictures. It is not like television. Plus, because children themselves are pre-literate, they can't read on their own, they rely on parents to give that. So it basically allows parent and the child to have rich verbal interactions over the book as well. So the book is never like the TV. It's always 3 shirts better in Turkish. Değil mi? 3 gömlek üstünde. But I am wondering where stories with no words place. Okay, I said I was going to go fast, and I am not doing that. But, I mean, I like the questions too. So, vision, finally. And this is one place where if you're interested in processing of visual information, you have more than a few researchers you can work with at Bilkent, right? There's Hussein, there's Katya, there's Aaron, there's Jennifer, and there's Yop. Did I miss anyone? Hulusi? Yes. And so, in any case, none of them, to the best of my knowledge, does developmental. But there is actually a lot of interesting aspects of adult visual cognition as well. So if you're interested, please do knock on their doors. So do infants see as well as we do when they are born? No. The answer is no. Some people had, remember I gave you those few in-class activity questions. Some people say they see better and stuff. No, they don't see better. Actually, they are quite blurry in their vision. The retina keeps developing. The neural structure of the retina keeps developing. And also, they are better at seeing things that are nearer to them than further away. Yes?
See black and white as well, because I saw somewhere that it said that they see blurry and black and white, and then
not completely black and white to the best of my knowledge. They actually, for example, because we know that they prefer colorful objects to less colorful objects. They do prefer patterns as well, we know that. But they can't really differentiate some colors as well as adults do. So color perception keeps developing as well. To the best of my knowledge, it is not all gray. Yes. 2 months, they start learning to focus their eyes, and they have better color vision. At 6 months, acuity, meaning seeing the details of visual stimuli, scanning, taramak, right, and tracking. Tracking is very important for infants. Think, they are immobile for a long time. They can't move on their own, right? So things come in and go out of their visual field. They will need to track those things, right? And they're already interested in moving things. Anyways, 6 to 7 months, depth perception starts developing. At 4 years, it reaches more like adult levels. Okay? And so, this is seeing 20 feet afar. This is not seeing close. So if the infant is looking at, say, a couple that is sitting 20 feet further away from them, how would they be seeing it? And you have here newborn, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and adult. And so at 8 months, at 4 months, at 8 months, they actually have enough visual acuity and clarity to get by. It is important. Why? They will become mobile. Yes? And so it's important, if they're walking and crawling, it's important that they see a little bit better, right? Yes. Infants are nearsighted. In other words, they are myopic. This does not have negative effects on infant functioning. This is a good question. This actually might have positive effects. I went back a slide. Of course, the ones who printed are looking at their slides, but let's think about it for a second. Why would it be advantageous that the infant isn't seeing very well when they're born? Why is it an advantage? Somebody who's, yes?
Maybe we can distinguish and know the mother better because she's always close.
Is it only the mother? What the father, you said? Is it only people? Object. Is it possible that they are also paying attention to what is in their immediate surrounding, including themselves as well? For example, hands. Have you ever watched a baby play with their hands? They bring it to their visual field, they take it away, they wiggle the fingers. So if, imagine, you know very little about the world and you can see everything, how confusing it would be. How much distraction it would provide, right? Yes? Think for a second that, let's say you have better perceptual abilities than you do. Let's say we can hear through these walls. So you remember that couple who was talking to one another, aşkım aşkım? Let's say they're out in the parking lot talking. And let's say we have such good hearing that we can hear them while you are in class. Would it be very distracting? Most likely, right? And so what it is it kind of focuses their attention. But you are right when you said, şimdi İpek diyeceğim. Dora. İpek is a very good bet because there were like 5 or 6 of you in the same class. Kime sorsan İpek. Yes. So like İpek said, maybe my task should be learning the last names of İpek. What is your last name? Ha, sensin Denil. Okay. See, I know İpek Denil, but I didn't know it was you. And so, so what you said still applies. Think about it. They are clearest in about 20 centimeters. And when a mother is holding the infant and looking at the infant, it's about that distance, right? And so it gives them enough to start those first social relationships. Okay. Birth to 1 month, they're sensitive to kinetic cues of things that are moving. Sensitive, 2 to 3 months, they start becoming more sensitive to binocular cues, meaning, you know, both eyes have different images. Brain actually takes them and puts them together to start giving you what? Depth perception, right? So infants in 2 to 3 months start becoming sensitive. It still develops to binocular cues, using images from the two different eyes to actually get more of a three-dimensional feeling of what there is. 5 to 12 months, they are sensitive to pictorial cues. Pictorial cues are the cues that artists use when they make a painting to give you depth perception. They, for example, make these lines that, for example, get longer and sometimes overlap as they go into the distance, the perspective, right? So they become more sensitive to pictorial cues around 5 to 12 months, and they become weary of heights. Sensitivity to kinetic cues, not only, I didn't explain it well enough, it's not only things that are moving outside, but if somebody, for example, brought something close to your face, you are going to, close your eyes, that's a reflex, but you are going to answer. The thing keeps getting bigger and bigger, but you still understand it's the same object, correct? And so they start understanding that things that are getting closer will kind of increase in size, and things that are moving further away will remain smaller, right? That is the kinetic cue, yes?
You said before, 5 slides.
5 slides earlier.
I don't know.
Tell me what you,
said that,
okay.
It was really now 6 months, they see tracking, they understand the tracking.
Mm-hmm.
Do they see that if something is out of their sight, does it still exist?
Mm-hmm. Hold on to that question. That is called object permanence, and we are going to talk more than you want us to talk about it in the next section. I am going to talk about 25 minutes, okay? Of course. So you don't know, we go home and talk about object permanence. Yes, Ipek? Hold on to it. Hold on to it. The video is coming. Okay? I have a new video about it too. Let's watch it and then ask your question. Okay? I'll make sure that you have time for it. Ah, there it is. Okay. Now.
Everyone has had some kind of an experience feeling something kind of like fear of heights, and it makes perfect common sense that we shouldn't jump over the edge of a drop-off because it's dangerous, and if it's dangerous, then we should probably be afraid of it.
Probably. Exactly how and when this hypothetical fear develops makes for pretty gleeful research inside Dr. Karen Adolph's lab.
We're discovering some surprising things that are flying in the face of, how people have studied locomotion for the last 100 years.
Including what babies do and feel when they're on a ledge.
So the story about fear of heights is that there was a very, very famous classical study in developmental psychology by Gibson and Walk in 1960 that showed that human infants and infants of a number of different species will avoid crossing over an apparent drop-off on what they called a visual cliff.
As soon as the baby can move about, he can be observed in the same way as other animals.
It's a glass table, and on one side there's a checkerboard pattern surface right under the glass. The other side of the table, the patterned surface is way down on the floor. So visually, it looks like a big 3-foot drop-off. So when human babies first begin crawling, most of them will crawl over the apparent drop-off, but after several weeks of crawling experience, then they'll begin to refuse to crawl over the drop-off. And the conventional interpretation of this was that infants are avoiding the drop-off because they're afraid of heights.
She's backing away very quickly.
No, she's not interested.
She wants no part of that side.
The experiment became the shaky foundation for the myth that crawling innately teaches us to fear heights.
Babies avoid going over the drop-off because they're afraid of heights. How do we know they're afraid of heights? Because they avoid crawling over the drop-off. So as you may have noticed, the argument is circular.
As it happened, the visual cliff was a better test of an infant's depth perception, not their fear of heights. And if you look closely, you may have actually noticed that the babies don't look particularly scared.
It is a perfectly safe surface of support. So after one trial, human infants cleverly figure this out, and then they will crawl over the drop-off.
So how do you really test if a baby's scared of heights?
You can test babies at the edge of a real cliff where there's no safety glass. It's just an actual drop-off, and the drop-off can be adjustable, so it can be little or really, really big.
And why stop there? Inside Dr. Adolph's Infant Action Lab, babies are tested on a variety of apparatuses.
You can test babies at the edge of a slope, so it can be steeper, steeper, steeper, crossing bridges that are wide or narrow over a surface of support, and so on. If there's no safety glass, you can test the same baby dozens and dozens of trials in the same session. And that means that you can determine for each individual infant when they think that that surface is safe and when they think it's risky within a couple of degrees of accuracy, like 2 degrees of accuracy for a slope.
Dr. Adolph has spent 25 years running tests like these, and the resulting data sets are both convincing and adorable.
Infants spend most of each trial right at the edge of the precipice. They're reaching their arm down over the drop-off. They are putting their little feet or their little hands on the bridge and taking little tiny steps at the edge. And all the while they're doing it with either neutral or positive facial expressions.
What's more surprising is how their approach changes as they learn different forms of locomotion.
So what happens is that when babies first begin crawling, they'll crawl right over the edge. Then over weeks of crawling, their responses get more and more accurate until finally they're at adult-like levels so that they can tell precisely whether a slope is safe for crawling or whether a drop-off is safe for crawling. But then the next week, when these babies stand up and face these same drop-offs, same slopes, same apparatus, now as a new walker, they walk right over the edge. So in fact, there seems to be 4 learning curves in development as babies learn to sit, learn to crawl, as they learn to cruise, and then finally as they learn to walk. So if they were afraid of heights, you should just be afraid of heights. In the rain and on a train and in a tree, you shouldn't see 4 separate learning curves.
So if babies aren't learning to be afraid of heights, what are they learning?
I think that what babies are learning over weeks of sitting, crawling, cruising, walking, is they're learning to perceive the relations between their bodies and the environment.
They're discovering what's possible and what's just a little too far.
And you can learn that without feeling any sort of fear at all. In fact, Eleanor Gibson, the person who first invented the visual cliff, wrote later in her life, as a goat is peering over the edge of a steep crag, it knows not to walk off the edge. And she said, I don't think it's feeling any emotions at all. It just knows not to go. And that's what we're seeing in babies.
Who probably know not to go. Probably. For Science Friday, I'm Luke Groskin.
think this was a particularly good video to show you also not only that depth perception develops and how it develops, but that as babies attain new abilities, such as when they shift from crawling to walking, then they have to relearn the relationship of their bodies with the height. Banu, Ipek, what was your question?
I wanted to ask, the visual clip, I know a version where they have the mothers trying to convince the babies
Yeah.
to not go to class. And I don't think they showed it very much
No.
in this video, but I wanted to ask, we were talking about, the last time we were talking about the fear of heights, the lyrics of heights. Do them, like, can the mothers convince the child to do something they don't want to cross over the plexiglass?
They certainly can after much coaxing. But I mean, some children will not, and others. I mean, they can be persuaded, but it's not that they. It's not. I don't think we know that all mothers can convince all children to walk over the plexiglass. It's also about how weary they are of the depth. Because the baby is convinced that they're going to fall, right? And so it's usually done more with crawling babies than walking babies over the plexiglass. So the depth perception may not be in full force yet for the child to understand that they will surely fall. It might just also be that the child thinks it's a bit dangerous, I shouldn't do this, and can be persuaded. But yes, we'll talk about that a little bit in the emotion section too, with parent-child interaction and what happens when that emotional highway is interrupted. Ipek, yes, another Ipek, yes.
Is it more linked to the attitude of the parent, like if I am forcing my child to walk over the cliff?
No, it's just an experiment.
No. I mean, if I am getting angry at him.
Oh, the mother never gets angry. The mother keeps smiling and jiggling.
I'm asking another one thing
Huh.
about normal thing, like the parents who are getting more angry towards their kid about doing something or not doing something. Do the kids more likely to do it or not?
Let's talk about an emotional development, because I kept thinking your question differently because we're still doing perception, right? So we will come to that. And so, all right, infants are born with necessary physiological requirements for perceiving colors, but newborns do not discriminate between two equally bright colors. By 2 months, color perception approaches adult levels, but of course, it will take years before they can reliably name them, right? So steps in pattern perception. Pattern, what is pattern in Turkish? Desa. Pattern perception is interesting and also important because there are many patterns in our surroundings. The most salient, the one that is most common pattern in our surroundings, what could it be? Square what? When you whisper to one another, I don't hear it. What is a pattern? Rectangular. It's a shape, a pattern. Checkered. It is a very simple word. Faces. It's a pattern, right? You see it over and over again. There are 40 of you looking at me right now. It is a pattern. The two eyes, the nose, and the mouth, right? So if you think about face as a pattern, it becomes even more interesting to think about how babies develop the ability to scan, to retain these patterns. So at 3 weeks, we have poor contrast sensitivity. At 3 weeks, infants prefer large and simple patterns. Their seeing is not really fine-tuned enough for them to actually see the details. That's why they're actually going for these large, simple patterns. At 2 months, they can detect detail and complex patterns. They can scan internal features of patterns. At 4 months, they can detect patterns even if boundaries are not present. I'm going to show you an example. At 12 months, they can detect objects even if 2/3 of a drawing is missing. Again, we are going to see a picture of that. Now, Franz actually created this looking chamber to understand infants' perception of patterns in the 60s. So the visual cliff experiment is also from the 60s. It seems like the 60s were a good time to be doing visual perception research. And they looked at how long will babies prefer to look at certain patterns over others. And so it's called paired preference, and they showed pattern stimuli, including faces. Infants showed a preference for pattern stimuli over non-pattern stimuli like this. You can see these are non-pattern, they're just different in color, but then there's this, this is writing, and there's a face. And it seems like infants are most interested in faces. But even when they're very young, they actually have the most experience with faces, correct? Their mother has a face, their father has a face, everybody they see practically has a face, right? And so they have seen this pattern more times than, say, something like this, right? This is the baby acuity test, and for example, it's looking to see with which detail, with what grade of detail can the baby see, because the baby prefers, for example, if the baby prefers these stripes over this, it means that the baby can make out the detail in this and may not be able to make the detail out in this too. And so there are visual, not only experiments, but examinations that can be done with very young babies as well to see if they are seeing clearly. And it is quite important that parents actually do get babies' eyes and even ears, if they feel like their infant doesn't hear noises, out. Why? Because they are a source of knowledge. Right? I mean, don't go to extreme cases. It might be that the baby is born nearsighted, say it's inherited, right? So it is important for the parents to understand what the baby can see and cannot see, not only for healthy babies, but for those with problem seeing, because it will determine the amount of information that your baby, and later your toddler, is going to be exposed to. I remember having worked once with parents where they realized that their child was farsighted and very high prescription too when the child was 5 years old. I mean, these children, for example, fall very frequently. They thought the child was just clumsy, for example. Like, it is important if the child is falling a lot, right, bruising themselves, walking through doors, right, it is very important to also check whether they see clearly. It will affect the amount of information that they gather. Infant scanning of faces, we see that at 1 month, for example, infants are paying more attention to the out contour of this pattern, which is the face. By 3 months, though, they start also examining the details of the inner features, not just the outer. Yes. Newborns and infants prefer to look at faces present in photographs and in simplified drawings, but usually they prefer it more when it's upright. So when you put it upside down, it kind of loses its allure a little bit. This is more pronounced when the face is moving, so they attend more to moving faces. Because in their life, they're mostly stationary and faces are moving, correct? Yes, they prefer looking at women's faces more, and they like looking at attractive faces more. Yes, so if, let me see, I only have 3 guys in the room, yes. Remind me your name. Arda. So if Arda goes, okay, Arda, I won't pick on you for this. Arda, I feel like you're in a stable, long relationship, committed. Yes, okay. Okay, let's go here. Mohammed, are you single? Yes, good. I mean, I didn't know. I wouldn't know, but it's good I can pick on you. Mohammed needs to decide. He's going on a date, but there are 2 options. Which one is more beautiful? What is the surest way? Mohammed picks up a baby, takes it, puts the ladies side by side, looks to see which one the baby is attending more, right? No, we don't take babies to bars to start with. But what is the reason? Well, mother's face is one thing. That's why they're actually attending more to women. They have more women who take care of them in their lives. Secondly, they also like symmetry, and symmetry we find beautiful, right? So symmetric faces are more interesting for young infants. And so if the face is symmetric, they're more likely to look at that face, not knowing it's beautiful, and we are more likely to categorize that face as more beautiful. That's why. Okay, and so that is that. At 2 months, they prefer mother's facial features over another woman's. At 3 months, they differentiate between similar-looking faces. So they become quite an expert on faces, don't they? All right, we won't go into whether that is innate or not. That is for a different discussion. 4-month-old infants, for example, will start perceiving, what do you see here? A square. A 12-month-old infants, do you see what this is? A motorbike or a bicycle, yes, in 12 months. But when we say perceive, they can't label it, obviously. They expect that this is a motorbike. They expect that these lines continue, okay? And we know them, again, through habituation type studies. They won't be surprised when they see the full picture. They'll understand they're still looking at the same thing, actually. Yes, we talked about this a little bit, but I'll just hold on to your question for a little bit because I'm almost out of time, but I do want to finish. So newborns prefer to look at the picture of the upright face, but okay. Until 2 months, there is no preference in C, when the face with features is scrambled. So it is not, why are we scrambling these faces? Because is it that children attend just to the nose? Is it that they find the eye interesting? Is it the features? If it were that way, then if they were scrambled, it wouldn't have mattered. Infants would still like looking at them. But it seems like this is not really as interesting as this one. Yeah? And so for that reason, it gives us clues about infants' preference. This preference is going to come into play when they are forming social relations. Okay, if both pictures are moving, infants prefer the drawing of the face rather than the scrambled face. Okay, and so they are more attentive to moving faces, correct? So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you and your best friend, who also happens to be a psychology student, are staring at babies. I found myself in a situation once where we were both looking at the baby, and the baby keeps looking at you. Now, you and your friend both know that babies like symmetrical faces, and the faces that babies look at more are found to be more attractive. What do you say? Oh, I've been moving a lot, that's why. Yes, that's how you will get out of it. Okay, object perception, we will talk a little bit more about this, but infants expect, for example, that if the rod is moving, if both ends of a rod are moving behind this block, then they expect this to be connected rather than two separate pieces. So this gives us some idea about their expectations about objects and movement, right? So are different sense modalities connected? Okay, despite my better judgment, if I am to finish this, I need to hold you for another 10 minutes. I won't do that. I will finish the last 10 slides and move on to Piaget and talk about it endlessly on Monday. Thank you very much. Yes.